on the resolution put out by Paul Ryan yesterday. 10:30 Eastern Time on C-SPAN 3. Long session we expect over there. We take you now to the floor of the House of Representatives for morning hour speeches.
The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker. Pursuant to
the Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., April 6, 2011. I hereby appoint the Honorable Renee Elmers to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 5, 2011, the Chair will now recognize members from the list submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each. But in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Roz Lightnin, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. Good morning. And I rise today to recognize an extraordinary young man from my congressional district, Mr. Joshua Williams, on the 5th anniversary of his outstanding organization called Joshua's Heart Foundation. At the age of 5, while watching Feed the Children one evening, a question arose in Joshua's head: what else can I do to help? In the weeks following, Joshua would create the basis to what has now become a great charity in our community. Today, Joshua's Heart Foundation has grown from feeding a handful of families to over 1,000 throughout South Florida in just a few years. Later this month, Madam Speaker, on April 30th, from 12 to 4 p.m. at Palm Island Park in Miami Beach in my congressional district, Joshua's Heart Foundation will be holding a celebration of its 5-year anniversary, and yes, they will be feeding the hungry. I encourage all in South Florida to join Joshua at this amazing event and again congratulate him on his many years of service to our community, even at such a young age. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back her time. The Chair lays before the House the following enrolled bill.
H.R. 4, an act to repeal the expansion of information reporting requirements for payments of $600 or more to corporations and for other purposes.
The Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Spear, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to speak about an abomination, and I vow to speak about it every week until this Congress and this administration does something more than offer lip service. Read my lips. The military must end rape in this country, and those who commit such crimes must be brought to justice. The fact that women in the military are being raped and our government is turning a blind eye is disturbing enough. Even worse, it is not our enemies abroad who are committing these horrific crimes. It's American soldiers abusing many of our own, often with nothing more than a slap on the wrist and sometimes with an unbelievable promotion. We have a military culture that condones and in some cases rewards this type of abusive and violent behavior against female soldiers, who are now more likely to be raped by fellow soldiers than killed by enemy fire. This is a national disgrace, and the longer it goes unaddressed, Congress becomes an accomplice in these crimes. You know, we in Congress do something really well. We hold hearings, and then we do nothing. Congress has held 18 hearings in the last 16 years on this issue, and nothing has changed. The Department of Defense estimates that over 19,000 service members were raped or sexually assaulted in 2010. But due to fear of retribution and a failure to prosecute these crimes, only 13.5% were reported. These are Department of Defense figures. 19,000 soldiers raped in the military every year. So beginning today, I'm going to tell these women's stories on the House floor. And I'm going to keep telling them and keep telling them until something is done about it. Earlier this year, 17 service members, 15 of them women, filed a lawsuit against the federal government accusing the Pentagon of ignoring their own cases of sexual assault. Today I want to tell you about one of those, Technical Sergeant Mary Gallagher. She deployed to Iraq in 2009 as a member of the Air National Guard. Her allegations are as follows. Now, I'm warning you, some of the language is graphic. On November 5th, 2009, while she was deployed in Iraq, a co-worker offered her a ride home to her living quarters. When she accepted, instead of driving her home, he drove her to a remote area and tried to kiss her. Technical Sergeant Gallagher threatened to report him. He became angry and verbally assaulted her. She reported the incident to command, but they claimed that they could do nothing about it. On November 7th, the co-worker began to stalk Technical Sergeant Gallagher. He tried to break into her room, claiming she didn't know what she was missing. He telephoned her repeatedly. She again reported her co-worker's threatening behavior to command, but was advised that they could do nothing because it was a he said, she said situation. 5 days later, on November 12th, the co-worker sexually assaulted her in the restroom. He pushed her up against the left side of the wall, took his right hand and pulled her pants and underwear down, and then used his hand to rub her vagina. He simultaneously ground his penis against her and talked about how much he was enjoying the assault. Technical Sergeant Gallagher described the incident this way to NBC. "I thought he was going to kill me that night. I felt completely isolated and alone, and really scared. Here I was, in the middle of a foreign country, in the middle of a war." Sergeant Gallagher did not report the violent assault immediately because command had advised her that nothing could be done after she had reported the co-worker's threatening behavior before. 2 weeks later, when she was asked for more details of the events on November 5th and 7th, at that point she reported the violent assault. Command's only response was to reassign the assailant and order him to refrain from any contact with her. She was then lectured by the base chaplain, who claimed that 96% of sexual assaults on women occur when drinking is involved. Technical Sergeant Gallagher had not been drinking during any of the assaults. This is a harrowing story, and it's one of 19,000 that must be heard. Technical Sergeant Gallagher fought for us. It's now time for us to fight for her. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back the remainder of her time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Heinrich, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. 14 weeks have gone by, and the Republican majority has still not offered a single jobs package. Instead, we continue to see radical attacks on everything from Medicare to vital clean air protections. The Dirty Air Act that we're considering today destroys the EPA's ability to limit air pollution under the Clean Air Act, an unprecedented move that ignores scientific consensus and public health. Instead of creating jobs, the Republicans are asking us to pass legislation that would put our nation's health and safety at risk. This radical bill also halts a measure that would save American families thousands of dollars a year in fuel costs and make America more energy independent. We must make our policy decisions based on science, not on politics. I would urge my colleagues to vote against this Dirty Air Act today, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the remainder of his time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Altire, for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to ask my colleagues to support a legislative effort to modernize the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. I've joined with Congressman Steve King to introduce the BATFE Reform Act, which will safeguard American citizens' Second Amendment rights by bringing common sense reform to the BATFE so that it can do a better job of punishing lawbreakers and keeping guns out of the hands of criminals without placing undue restrictions on local businesses in this difficult economy. Our proposed legislation would make sure that federally licensed firearms dealers are not subject to poorly formulated and unnecessary regulations by updating the rules and potential penalties governing individuals and businesses that hold a federal firearms license so they are clear and fair. Our goal is to create a fair system under which firearms dealers with minor paperwork errors are no longer threatened with the loss of their livelihoods. Defining a willful violation is an important step in clarifying the way federal firearms license holders are punished by the BATFE. Certainly the Bureau is limited in most cases to either giving a warning or totally revoking a license, no matter how minor or severe the violation. That's the current law. But I believe that these small business owners and law-abiding citizens should not be so harshly punished for small or even insignificant bookkeeping errors. Our legislation would create a new system of penalties for federal firearms license holders who commit minor violations and prevent the Bureau from revoking federal firearms licenses for minor technical violations, such as improperly using abbreviations or filing records in the wrong order. Revocation of a license could still be an option for the BATFE to punish willful violation of the law, but it would not be the only option. The BATFE Reform Act would also make common sense reforms to help small businesses that sell firearms. For example, it would provide a federal firearms license holder with the time to liquidate their inventory if they're going out of business. It would also allow a grace period for people taking over an existing firearms business in which they can correct pre-existing record-keeping violations from the previous owner and make necessary updates to the license application procedures. Our bill would permanently ban the creation of a centralized electronic index of dealers' records to protect gun owners' privacy and ensure that law-abiding gun owners will not unknowingly wind up in a federal gun registration database. Congress has included this language in its annual appropriations bill, banning the creation of an index for more than a decade. This time we want to give it the weight of law so we can give gun owners certainty and make this policy part of the existing law. The NRA has endorsed this legislation, and I would ask my fellow representatives to show their support for the Second Amendment and small businesses nationwide by co-sponsoring the BATFE Reform Act. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the remainder of his time. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Capter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to honor the memory today of the victims of the April 10, 2010 plane crash in Smolensk, Russia, that 1 year ago killed much of the nation of Poland's national leadership. Last year, the House and Senate overwhelmingly passed resolutions to express America's unwavering support for the people and government of Poland and to offer our heartfelt sympathies for the families and loved ones of those who perished. April 10th has long been a day of memory for the Polish people and those of Polish descent because on that day, 71 years ago, the Soviets carried out a horrific act against the Polish people. I'm talking about the Katyn Forest Massacre. Last year, Polish President Lech Kaczynski was leading a Polish delegation to Russia for the 70th commemoration of that massacre. This was to be an historic event because it was also to be the first time that a Russian leader was to attend the commemoration. The truth of the Katyn Forest Massacre was hidden and lied about for decades, and today the entire world knows that in 1940 the Soviet secret police were ordered by Joseph Stalin to systematically round up and murder all of Poland's officers, intellectuals, national leaders, teachers, university presidents. As many as 22,000 people were killed in that heinous crime. For decades, the Soviets tried to cover up their guilt by blaming this atrocity on the Nazis. There's plenty to blame for them. but also the truth of Katyn was never told. I am proud that this country and this House have long demanded that the truth about the Katyn massacre be exposed. In 1951, it was this House of Representatives that established a select committee to conduct and investigate the facts, evidence, and circumstances of the Katyn forest massacre. 1 year later, the committee unanimously concluded that the Soviets had been responsible. Unconscionably, the Soviets continued to deny their actions until President Mikhail Gorbachev made a statement on April 13, 1990. We knew that the 70th commemoration of this atrocity was to be historic, but the world was further shocked that this tragic day was to witness yet another obliteration of the leaders of the Polish nation. Last April 10th, the Polish president's airliner, a Russian Tupolev Tu-154M, that had been recently overhauled in Russia, crashed as it was landing near Smolensk. Everyone on board, all 96 people, were killed, including Poland's president, its first lady, the deputy foreign minister, the deputy defense minister, the director of national intelligence, dozens of members of parliament, the chiefs of staff of the army and navy, along with the president of the Polish bank. Also on board the plane was Anna Valentinovich, the former dock worker whose firing in 1980 sparked Poland's heroic solidarity strike that ultimately overthrew the communist government of Poland. Ryszard Kaczorowski, who served as Poland's final president in exile before the country's return to democracy, was killed, as well as Wojciech Severin, a Chicago artist whose father was killed in Katyn. I want to honor their memory today in the memory of all those who were killed at Katyn, and I want to express our support for the Polish people and the Polish government as it seeks full answers surrounding the plane crash, particularly access to the black boxes that were taken by Russia, and the government's other physical materials held related to this tragedy. Poland is a strong U.S. ally. Polish leaders like Tadeusz Kościuszko helped fight for our country's freedom when the Republic was founded over 200 years ago, and America stood with Poland's solidarity movement as it fought against the oppression of the communists. In the face of these dual tragedies at Smolensk on April 10, 2010, and Katyn in 1940, America stands with the liberty-loving people of Poland. Madam Speaker, I yield back my remaining time.
The gentlewoman yields back the remainder of her time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Michoud, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to express my concern about the decline in U.S. manufacturing and China's currency manipulation. It is time our government responded to these issues by developing a national manufacturing strategy and bringing to the floor immediately H.R. 639, the Currency Reform for Fair Trade Act. This chart here shows a significant drop in manufacturing employment in the United States. We have lost nearly 6 million manufacturing jobs in the last decade alone. At our current rate, it will take us 24 years to get back the U.S. manufacturing jobs that we have lost between the year 2000 and 2010. And just last month, a report revealed the United States manufacturing is now in second place behind China. Making things here at home is critical for our economic diversity, our national security, and just makes common sense. China's enormous growth in manufacturing has come at America's expense, and it is bad for American businesses and American jobs. There are many reasons for our manufacturing sector decline. I want to highlight two that the Obama administration and Congress can act upon today. First, we need to develop, adopt, and adhere to a comprehensive national manufacturing strategy. Second, we need to address China's currency manipulation and stop giving our manufacturing jobs to Beijing. A national manufacturing strategy makes sense. Many developed economies and many of our competitors, including China, have them. In China, if China is going to implement nationwide policy designed to boost specific sectors, so should we. Our strategy should not involve illegal trade practices like China, but it should involve clear objectives. We should ask ourselves the question, What should the American manufacturing look like? I believe a diverse, robust manufacturing sector is key to a strong American economy and critical to our national security. The strategy should also evaluate what policy changes are needed to promote more domestic production. We should seek the input from companies that currently choose to make their products in the U.S., and we should also consider ways to incentivize U.S. production through our tax structure. And finally, the manufacturing strategy should establish clear metrics for success over the short, medium, and long term. Our manufacturing sector has declined over the last several decades, and it won't be rebuilt overnight. But if we are going to reclaim our spot as a leader in manufacturing, we are going to have our own roadmap for the United States manufacturing industry. The second thing we should do to help U.S. manufacturing is address China's currency manipulation, the devaluing of the yen. China makes their exports cheaper and U.S. imports more expensive. This is unfair, and it creates an unlevel playing field that forces U.S. businesses to close their doors here in the United States. We cannot wait any longer to take action. Diplomacy has not worked, so we must seek legislative action. Congress must pass the Currency Reform for Fair Trade Act immediately, and President Obama must sign it. In addition, the United States should bring a WTO case against China for undervaluing its currency. We have to fight this blatant violation of trade law, though take every step available to do that. China's currency manipulations puts Americans out of work and forces American businesses to close their door. We must act with urgency to stop that. I urge my colleagues to support a national manufacturing strategy and urge the House leadership to bring H.R. 639 to the floor to a vote immediately. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, budgets are not simply about dollars and cents. They are about values and priorities. And the debate over spending has revealed Republican priorities, in my opinion, in the worst possible light. First, Republicans passed a spending plan for the remainder of the fiscal year that would cripple America's ability to out-innovate, out-educate, and out-build its competitors. That spending plan would cut billions in medical and energy research, cut out support for 20,000 research scientists, kick 200,000 children out of Head Start, put college out of the reach for millions of middle-class students, and end vital infrastructure projects in 40 states, infrastructure projects which provide American jobs. A consensus of nonpartisan economists has found that the plan will cost us hundreds of thousands of jobs. And Mark Zandi, who advised John McCain when he was running for president on economics, of Moody Analytics, chief economist, and an advisor to Senator McCain, said that it would cost almost 700,000 jobs. In addition to these skewed priorities, Republicans are insisting that any bill to keep the government open must also include controversial social policy provisions that have little, if anything, to do with the deficit. Even though their own pledge to America promised, and I quote, to end the practice of packaging unpopular bills with must-pass legislation, bills that should pass on their merits, not as related to some extraneous issue. Rather than compromise with President Obama and the Democrats in the Senate and the House, Republicans are threatening once again to shut down government, as they did in 1995. Now they tell us that they'll back off on their threat, but only if we pass a partisan, one-week spending bill that triples the ransom to keep the government open. In other words, this bill contains 3 times the weekly cuts as the last week-to-week bill did. It also takes all cuts from only a small slice of the budget. Frankly, Madam Speaker, that makes this latest bill a mockery of fiscal responsibility, especially because it leaves entirely untouched for the rest of the year what the Secretary of Defense himself has called the Pentagon's culture of endless money. This partisan patch contradicts Republicans' own promises to put everything on the table, defense spending included. Listen to their own words as reported by the Associated Press on January 23rd. Quote, "The House's new majority leader, Representative Eric Cantor of Virginia, has said defense programs could join others on the cutting board." But, of course, they haven't done that. New York Times, January 27th, Representative Chris Gibson, a Tea Party-endorsed freshman Republican and retired Army colonel, said and made it clear that no part of the Pentagon's $550 billion budget, some $700 billion including the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, was immune. He said this deficit that we have threatens our very way of life, and everything needs to be on the table. However, they have not done that. Congressman Mike Pence on January 7th said this, quote, "If we're going to put our fiscal house in order, we have to be able to look at defense. We need a strong defense. I'm a supporter of a strong defense. But to take those dollars off the table is irresponsible and inconsistent with the representations that our Republican friends have made." Those words are sounding very hollow, however, today. Why are Republicans breaking their word, Madam Speaker? Because, in my opinion, they know the only way to get their conference to support this spending bill is to bribe it with a year of defense spending left untouched, and a divisive social policy provision as well, which is what they said they would not do. What we need to do is sit down and over the next 72 hours, now over the next 48 hours, frankly, come to compromise. That's our job. My way or the highway is never going to get it done. Finally, Republicans showed their priorities in their budget for the upcoming fiscal year. We'll have a lot to say about that in the days ahead. Their budget ends Medicare as we know it. Seniors thought that they were going to protect Medicare. Well, their way of protecting it is ending it. It dismantles Medicaid and other vital programs for our seniors. We'll talk a lot about that in the coming days, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington, Mr. McDermott, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, the Republicans ran on a jobs agenda, but so far the Congress, they have not done one thing to help Americans find jobs. For 14 weeks, they have been running the House with not one mention of jobs. The Republicans have put their budget proposal out now, and now we have their real agenda. A radically ideological plan to protect giveaways to corporations and to attack the elderly, the poor, women, and children of the country. Reaganomics drove this country to the brink of bankruptcy in the 1980s. Reaganomics drove the world economy to the brink again in the Bush years, and now the Republicans are trying for a third time to impose their intolerance and everyone for themselves economics on the American people. We need to be fiscally responsible. I think there are things moderate Republicans and Democrats can agree on, but the Republican plan is to dismantle the social safety net of this country. This is a debate we should have. Republicans often chuckle that winning at politics is worth the cost to their conscience of being straight with the public. I think we need to let citizens come to their own conclusions by giving them some facts. And here are some indisputable facts about the Republican budget plan. First, the Republican budget has mostly fictitious numbers. The media has picked up on the Republican number of $6 trillion in savings, like catnip. But the Republicans made up most of the numbers of the plan to get there. To create this big number, the Republicans ignored the Congressional Budget Office. That's quite a strategy. If the nonpartisan budget scorekeepers don't say what the Republicans want, the Republicans just ignore it and make up their own numbers. Secondly, the Republicans' answer to the people is the need to dismantle Medicaid and leave health care for the poor to the states. The Republicans will drop millions of low-income people, children, seniors, disabled, and pregnant women off their rolls. Not only that, those patients that are left on the rolls will get a different kind of care from state to state, and some of that care is very bare bones. You shouldn't have to care about where you live if you're poor, elderly, or a child in this country. Some states you don't want to live in. Third, the Republican plan does nothing, not one thing, about the hundreds of billions of dollars of tax breaks American people give corporations every single year. The Republican plan even cuts more for the super rich in this country. Republicans say they don't like to pick winners and losers, but they pick winners and losers all the time when they give money to oil companies and Wall Street and then push the disabled, people living into poverty, off the Medicaid health insurance. And the Republican Party does nothing, not one thing, about the defense budget. Iraq is winding down, Afghanistan is winding down, Libya will be over shortly, but they don't take one thin dime out of the defense budget. They can't find anything to save any place. Now, the American people need to know the facts. The fact is that if we restored the fair Clinton-era tax rates, what we had in effect before 2000, and kept all other spending at the same point, our deficit drops by 2/3. That's where we are today. In 10 years, it drops by 2/3. That's a simple plan that is very doable without destroying the safety net in this country, without going after all the poor and the dispossessed in this country. We still have work to lower the deficit even more. We need the right priorities, and the right priorities should be figuring out more ways to save on health care spending. We spend too much for too little results. If we don't deal with health care costs, this deficit is going to be very tough to deal with. But the Republican plan is to demonize poor people and union workers. Take a good look at Wisconsin. You'd think all the problem in Wisconsin was because of school teachers. Now, that blaming everyone else for the economic disaster is simply to avoid the admission of what they've done. The Republicans take zero responsibility for their disastrous policies and then say the situation they created is the reason why we need to implement every form of radically failed philosophy. It's cynical, it's ugly policies, and it's the Republican strategy. Consider what they're doing to seniors. They're saying to seniors, now you have a set of guaranteed benefits. We're going to take it away and give you a voucher. Go look for some health insurance.
The gentleman's time has expired.
I yield back the balance of my time.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Woolsey, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my friends on the other side of the aisle released their budget blueprint for 2012 yesterday. Let's leave aside for the moment that they're prepared to shut down the government rather than fund it at acceptable levels for the rest of fiscal year 2011. If you thought H.R. 1 was bad, wait until you see what they have in store for 2012 and the decade to come. It's an appalling, radical, reckless proposal. They want to shred the social safety net and decimate the programs for the most vulnerable Americans, the programs that they depend on to get through day-to-day life. They demand sacrifice from working families and the middle class, but none, no sacrifice from special interests and big oil companies. I saw a lot of words in their budget proposal, but one that I don't believe was mentioned a single time is Afghanistan. The war in Afghanistan, and in addition to having cost more than $15 100 American lives is costing the taxpayers nearly $7 billion a month and is proving to be a crashing failure. This war is in its 10th year, and we still haven't vanquished the Taliban. We still haven't brought a stable democracy to Afghanistan, and we still haven't trained the Afghans to take responsibility for their own security. The Republicans want to cut wasteful, ineffective government programs. Well, if that's true, I suggest the majority start with Afghanistan before going after American seniors, school children, and working people. My Republican colleagues believe in limited government as long as the things they're limiting are taxes paid by special interests and investments in people who need a helping hand. When it comes to foreign invasions and decade-long military occupations, Republicans are the biggest spenders of all. With these priorities, not only have they lost their moral compass, they've lost the American people as well. Recent polling shows that overwhelming majorities want to see spending on Medicare, Medicaid, and education increase or stay the same. By contrast, nearly two-thirds of Americans are fed up with the war in Afghanistan and don't think it's worth fighting. It's impossible, Madam Speaker, to take seriously any budget proposal that doesn't even mention Afghanistan or Iraq and doesn't cut billions and billions in wasteful war spending from the budget. It's time to bring our troops home. It's the right thing to do. It's what the people want. It's a sensible, humane, compassionate path to fiscal responsibility. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back the remainder of her time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Frank, for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, earlier this year, an irresponsible bigot burned a Koran in Florida. That was a despicable act. But unfortunately, a number of far worse acts eventuated. That is the murder, calculated, deliberate murder of a number of innocent people in Afghanistan by people purporting to be defending their religion against a burning of a book in Florida by massacring innocent civilians in Afghanistan. And I am pleased that people, including General Petraeus and others, condemn the irresponsibility of the Koran burning. But there needs to be even greater condemnation of the notion that that in any way justifies murder. That includes a condemnation, in my judgment, of the President of Afghanistan, our increasingly unimpressive ally, Mr. Karzai, who I believe added to the furor there by insisting that the man who burned the Koran should have been prosecuted. Well, under American law, he was not prosecuted. He should not have been. The right to do obnoxious things is a very important part of the First Amendment. But what is most appalling is that people purported in the name of religion then not even to do anything against that individual, and that would have been unjustified. I am not suggesting that there is any justification for any violence against him. But violence against people in Afghanistan, employees of the United Nations there for humanitarian reasons, other citizens of Western countries, for them to have been assaulted and murdered by people purporting to be acting in the name of religion, that is the true outrage. And I hope people will resist any temptation even to equate the two. An act of stupid and offensive bigotry against a book should be criticized. Murder of innocent people in the name of a religion, and it's particularly ironic that people who committed these murders claim to be vindicating their religion. Indeed, no denigration of a religion could be greater than to murder innocent people in its name. If I were to be asked what did I think more detracted from the image of Islam, this irresponsible publicity seeker in Florida burning a Koran, or people in the name of the religion murdering innocent people, including those who went to Afghanistan only to help, is clearly the latter. So, Madam Speaker, let's be very clear that nothing in what happened with the burning of a Koran comes close to justifying the outrageous, murderous behavior of people in Afghanistan. And I am pleased that there is attention given to this, but the condemnation should be of this kind of attack on innocent citizens, and we ought to keep this into some perspective.
The gentleman yields back the remainder of his time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio, for 5 minutes.
Well, yesterday, Paul Ryan of Wisconsin, the Republican chair of the Budget Committee, revealed his projected future for seniors in America and their health insurance coverage. It's very interesting. What he says is, starting with people who are age 55 and younger, there would be no traditional Medicare. That's a pretty radical departure. But he says, don't worry, what we will do, what in the Republican vision we will do, is the government will take money and it will give it to private health insurance companies. Seniors would be forced to go to those private health insurance companies and buy a policy from them, and it would be offset by the amount of money that the federal government gave to the private health insurance industry, and market discipline would prevail in the Paul Ryan view of the world. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Well, guess what? We got that today. We have an unregulated health insurance industry in this country, exempt from antitrust law, unlike any other business in America. And over the last 10 years, premiums for people who buy health insurance have doubled in my state, pretty much the same all around the country. Some places more than doubled, other places a little bit less. But that's over 10 years. But in Paul Ryan's view of the world, that's a success. Why is it a success? Well, because insurance company profits are up very dramatically. So what if people are paying twice as much for their policies and they have more and more exclusions every year? There's not a little problem with his proposal, other than the fact that this is not a competitive industry. They are allowed to collude, redline people. They are allowed to get together and collude and drive up prices. They are allowed to get together and collude and decide which states they will go into or get out of to help their sister and brother companies make more profits. He would do nothing about that. That system would continue. Then there's the little problem of he would repeal so-called Obamacare. Well, one of the things I think most Americans liked about that legislation was it prohibits insurance companies from refusing to sell you a policy because you were sick once. That's called pre-existing condition. It also prohibits insurance companies from taking away your policy the day you get sick, something called a rescission. In Paul Ryan's world, those things are back. Pre-existing condition exclusions. Guess what? Aging is a pre-existing condition. Go out today, if you're 55 years old and you've been sick once in your life, and try and buy, at any reasonable price, a private health insurance policy. In Paul Ryan's world, market discipline will take care of that. No. What he's doing is a massive shifting of costs onto seniors. The kind of thing that drove seniors into bankruptcy back in the 50s and 60s and had their poverty rate at 20%. That's why we adopted Medicare in this country, so seniors wouldn't be driven out of their homes and into bankruptcy in their later years when most people require more health care. In Paul Ryan's world, the heck with that. In fact, the Congressional Budget Office, which some days he likes when they give him answers he likes, and some days he doesn't like when they give him answers he doesn't like, but it's an impartial group, bipartisan group, and at this point controlled by the Republicans, has said that under Paul Ryan's world, seniors, instead of paying 25% of the cost of their health care, which they do today, and they would in the future if we continued Medicare, will pay 68% of the cost of their health care. Now, how many people, how many seniors in this country, other than the people he pals around with on Wall Street and at the country club, but other than them, how many people can afford to pay 68% of their health care costs? What middle-class American can afford that in retirement, no matter how prudent they've been their whole life, no matter how much money they've saved their whole life? Very, very, very few. So we have here a plan to enrich the private health insurance industry, allow them to return to all their bad old ways, rescissions, pre-existing exclusions, and all that, so that the government can give them money. And he says this will save the government a lot of money. Well, it might, but it's going to kill a lot of seniors or drive them into bankruptcy, just like the days before we had Medicare. If one looks at the other Republican creation of the last decade, Medicare Part D, you know, that thing where we help seniors with their pharmaceutical costs, with their drug prescription. That wasn't done through Medicare. It was done through the private insurance industry. It cost $750 billion, $650 billion, $650,000 million over 10 years. Borrowed money.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Give all the money to the insurance companies. Good work, Paul.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Chu, for 5 minutes.
Yesterday, Congressman Paul Ryan introduced the Republican Party's fiscal year 2012 Road to Ruin budget. We have been back to work in the House for 14 weeks, and for 14 straight weeks, the Republican majority has done nothing to create jobs. They haven't even put a single jobs bill on the House floor. In fact, their proposed spending bill for 2011 actually costs America 700,000 jobs. Now, Congressman Ryan and the Republican leadership want to extend their job-killing policies and permanently eliminate the middle class. The Republicans' road to ruin is nothing short of an attack on working families, seniors, students, and children. It attacks America's seniors by ending the Medicare guarantee and putting your fate in the hands of private insurance companies. It attacks America's workers by not doing anything to create jobs and by gutting job training. It attacks America's students by cutting education and raising college costs for nearly 10 million students. Now, no matter what side of the aisle we are on, we can all agree that deficit reduction is important. But the question is, how do we do it? What we can't do is balance the budget on the backs of America's middle class, our seniors, our students, and our children. But I do know some things we can't afford. At a time when middle-class families can't pay their bills, we can't afford to keep spending billions in subsidies for big oil and giveaways for special interest. At a time when our senior population is growing, we can't afford to slash funding for nursing homes and put health insurance companies back in control of health care. At a time when our economy needs an infusion of the best and brightest workers, we can't afford to cut public education while protecting tax breaks for companies who ship jobs overseas and spending billions of dollars in tax breaks on people already making upward of $500,000. A budget isn't just about dollars and cents, it's about priorities and values. And as representatives of the American people, our priorities and values should reflect their values. Jobs, a secure retirement, the promise of educational opportunity, and the certainty that if your child is sick, then you will be able to afford to see the doctor. If you vote for this bill, then who amongst us could go home and look senior citizens in the eye, knowing we ended Medicare as we know it? Who could look an unemployed worker in the eye, knowing we didn't do anything to create jobs? Who could look a student in the eye, knowing we took away their opportunity to succeed with a quality education? I want to reduce our deficit. I know it's vital for our fiscal future, but I also want to look at my constituents in the eye and tell them I stood up for their priorities and not those of big oil, international corporations, and special interests. And the truth is, we can do both. We can get our deficit under control, and we can do it without cuts that hurt hardworking families. Thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back the remainder of her time. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until noon today.
Today, the House will consider a measure to repeal the authority of the Environmental Protection Agency over regulating greenhouse gas emissions from stationary sources, such as power plants and refineries. Live coverage when